Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to friends old and new, near and far. My name is Farah Sarouk, and I am the Research and Development Director at the Centre for Literacy and Primary Education. It's both my real pleasure and privilege to be chairing the launch and celebration of this very important and timely book. Over our long history, the teaching team at the CLPE has worked alongside and beyond, supporting them to see the children they serve, understand their needs and interests, and evolve and tailor their teaching accordingly. We've stood shoulder to shoulder with colleagues to support them in navigating challenging terrain and empower them to interpret policy with integrity. We've always been clear that one size does not fit all and that striking a balance is key. And as we approach a political crossroads here in the UK, communicating this principle is crucial. This evening, we're delighted to be joined by an esteemed panel of academics from around the world, the US, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, who have kindly agreed to come together to celebrate with us and share insights into their work and perspectives. We will have contributions from Professor Young-Suk Grace Kim, Dr. Hei Chung Un, Professor Rachel Hayden, David Reedy, and last but not least, the authors of The Balancing Act, an evidence-based approach to teaching phonics, reading and writing, Professor Dominic Wyse and our very own Charlotte Hacking. Okay. I will introduce each speaker. I don't know why it's doing that. Can you guys hear that? Okay, that's fine. We can hear it together, or not. I'll introduce each speaker who will present for 10 minutes. You will then have permission to applaud before we move on to the next speaker. Encouraging you to be brief with your applause is not to undermine the value of what will be brilliant presentations, but actually more of a reflection of how ambitious we've been in wanting them all to share their wisdom and insights within a 1-hour window. Following an hour of presentations, we will provide 10 minutes for questions from the floor, so do be noting your thoughts as we go along. We'll then announce golden ticket winners who will get a copy of this much-awaited book. And then we hope you can stay afterwards to join us for drinks, nibbles, conversations, and book signings. And hopefully the sound will behave. Okay, stop there. So, without further ado, I will introduce the first speaker, Professor Grace Kim from the University of California at Irvine, USA, who will be talking about enhancing literacy, leveraging the synergy of reading and writing.
I'm going to talk briefly about leveraging the synergy of reading and writing. Can we move to the next slide, please? So I want to quickly acknowledge funding agencies that allowed my work on reading and writing. Next slide, please. All right, so if I ask whether reading and writing are related, many people will say they are. Then the question is how strongly they're related and why they're related, and what does the relation implicate for teaching, reading, and writing. So these are our guiding questions for today's talk. Next slide, please. To think about these questions, I'm going to draw on a theoretical model called the interactive dynamic literacy model. Here's one way of representing the theoretical model, and you can take a look. As you can see, there's quite a lot going on here. So next slide, please. This is another version representing the interactive dynamic literacy model. The same idea is represented, but in a different way that I think makes a little bit more intuitive sense. So I'm going to use this one to go over briefly the interactive dynamic literacy model. So according to this model, reading and writing are not independent. They are related. The primary reason they're related is because they largely draw on the same skills and knowledge. So let me just walk through a bit here. So at the roof or at the top, are reading comprehension and written composition, right? So they're together and they're at the top. That means they are related because they draw on all the things below, the same things below. Right next to it is text reading and text writing fluency. They're right there because that skill connects the two pillars to the roof. So one of the pillars is a lexical literacy skill, that is word reading and spelling skill. And then the other pillar is oral discourse or discourse oral language pillar that includes listening comprehension, oral composition, etc. And the foundational skills for lexical literacy is code-related immersion literacy skills such as knowledge and awareness of orthography, phonology, and morphology. And the skills that support oral discourse skill is higher order cognition and regulation such as making inferences, understanding multiple perspectives, and the foundational language skills such as vocabulary knowledge and grammatical knowledge, etc. At the very bottom are executive functions, such as working memory, cognitive flexibility, and attentional control. They're at the bottom because the executive functions are necessary for supporting everything above, right? And in the middle of the building, on one side is social emotional aspect, including motivation, attitude, self-efficacy. It's located there because this skill aspect develops very closely with lexical literacy, text reading, text writing, and reading comprehension, etc. And on the other side, there's content knowledge, world knowledge, and discourse knowledge, and it's located there because it's very important for the discourse oral language and the text reading and writing and reading comprehension and written composition. So there are three hypotheses about the nature of relations among these skills and knowledge. One is hierarchical relations, meaning that things build upon each other. The building structure represents that hierarchical relations. Interactive relations means that skills shown here develop interactively, meaning they have bidirectional relations. And the last one is dynamic relations. And can you move to the next slide, please? So the dynamic relations hypothesis has several aspects. That means that dynamic relations means the relation between reading and writing differ as a function of several factors. The first factor is that the first one is that reading, writing relations differ by linguistic grain size. So word reading and spelling are word level or lexical level literacy skills, and they're expected to have a stronger relation than discourse level literacy skills such as reading comprehension and written composition. And I'm not going to go into details about why. But the second point here is that reading and writing relations are expected to differ as a function of developmental phase of reading and writing. So it's positive to have a stronger relation at the beginning phase of development compared to later phase. And the third reason why reading and writing might have different relations is because of measurement, how reading is measured, how writing is measured. Next slide, please. So what does evidence say about reading-writing relations? So we conducted a meta-analysis looking at the literature systematically, and we had two primary questions. One is, are reading and writing related? Second one is, if they're related, does the relation vary as a function of linguistic grain size, developmental phase, and measurement? And after a systematic search in multiple databases, we identified 395 studies involving over 120,000 participants, and we had over 2,200 effect sizes. Next slide, please. All right, so here's an abbreviated version of results. Overall, reading and writing are related at 0.72. So what does 0.72 mean? If you, I present the kind of scatter, the 0.72 relation using the scatter plot you see here. So as you can see, on the x-axis is reading skill and the y-axis is writing skill. You can see that those who have higher reading skills tend to have higher writing skills. So the relation is strong, right? Next slide, please. So that was an overall relation across all many different types of reading and writing skills. Now let's break it down to different linguistic grain sizes. When we look at the relation for word reading and spelling, this is lexical level literacy skills, right? The relation is very strong. It is 0.82. Now, better yet, when we examine the relation for those who studies that word reading and spelling measures with high reliabilities, the relation is 0.92, which is very extremely strong. Next slide, please. Now, when we examine the relation for reading comprehension, written composition, the relation was 0.44, which is considered moderate, but definitely not as strong, right? All right, let's move on to the next slide. So let's look at, here are two plots that show the relation between word reading and spelling compared to reading comprehension and written composition. So the one for word reading and spelling shows the relation of 0.92. You can see that those with high word reading on the x-axis have high spelling skill, and those with low word reading have low spelling skill. Now, if you look at the plot for reading comprehension and written composition, it shows a different pattern, right? Consider those who have a score of 1 on reading comprehension. That means slightly above the average, right? So you see the score of 1 on reading comprehension x-axis, right? Now look at their writing performance, and you can see there's a distribution of scores on written composition. So that means one can have a relatively high performance on reading comprehension, but some can have low writing skill and others have average writing skill, and yet some others have even like above average writing skill. Again, there's distribution, right? That's the moderate relation. Next slide, please. Now going back to the relation between word reading and spelling, the relation was weaker for adults. And that was that aligns with hypothesis of the interactive dynamic literacy model. And the relation was stronger for languages with alphabetic writing systems such as English compared to Chinese. Next slide, please. Lastly, reading comprehension and written composition relation differed by measurement of written composition. So reading comprehension was more strongly related to written composition when written composition was evaluated as writing quality rather than writing productivity or text length. Next slide, please. All right, let's briefly think about implications of reading-writing relations. And we had a chance to talk about this in a recent article. I'm going to just kind of draw from that. Next slide, please. So first, leverage assessment data in reading and writing to inform effective reading and writing instruction. More often than not, reading assessment considers only reading skills and do not consider writing skills. The same is true for writing assessment. However, the reading and writing relations imply that understanding students' reading skills can enhance our understanding of their writing skills and the other way around. And we talk about a few examples in the article. Next slide, please. Second is not either or, but both. Ensure the development of lower order skills while also supporting the development of higher order skills. So the hierarchical nature relations, right, according to the interactive dynamic literacy model, implies that it's very important to build a strong foundation for lower order skills, right, to support development of higher order skills. However, this does not mean that we should wait to provide systematic and explicit instruction on higher order skills until lower order skills develop. Instead, lower and higher order skills should be taught. For example, in the reception year in the UK or kindergarten year in the US, it is important to teach print-related emergent literacy skills such as phonological range, letter knowledge, morphology, etc., to support the development of word reading and spelling. It is also very important to teach meaning-making processes and skills such as vocabulary, grammatical knowledge, higher order thinking skills such as making inferences, understanding multiple perspectives, etc. Let's move to the next slide, please. And the third one is that to make reading, writing connections visible and explicit. Many students do not readily see the connection between what they learn in the context of reading and what they learn in writing. And this is particularly important for reading comprehension and written composition. Recall that word reading and spelling are much more strongly related compared to between reading comprehension and written composition. And we talk about some examples of how to make reading, writing connections visible in the article that I just mentioned. So overall, the field tended to consider reading and writing skills separately, but theory and evidence suggest that systematic efforts to integrate them can have synergistic effects on students' reading and writing development. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'm here to, I'll be happy to discuss any points.
Thank you so much, Professor, and thank you for joining us. Next up, we have Dr. Hei Chung Un from the University of Melbourne talking about the monolithic approach to phonics teaching, Englishes and their pronunciations. Come on up.
I see. Oh, okay. Hello. Hi. Okay. So should I just ignore my echoing sound? Okay. So English is as a pluricentric language and phonics teaching in primary context. So I'm giving you a bit of a new idea, new lens, how we view English language in terms of teaching phonics in particular in primary context. So before I'm talking anything else, and let me give you some attitude towards different Englishes, and then give us some idea, key framework, what does it mean by English as a pluricentric language, and then some of implications and phonics teaching in particular in lower level primary teaching. Okay, all right. I was gonna read this, but maybe, maybe not. But let me read it. I practice it, so I might use my practicing skills. So this is attitude shown American English when American English was established, being established. So, okay, I'm no friend to what is called a purism, but a jealous one to the neology. The new circumstances under which we are placed call for new words, new phrases, and American dialect will therefore be formed. It is entirely natural evolution of language resulting from the new environment in which it has been transplanted. Great Britain, whose children we are, whose language we speak, should no longer be our standard. She is too great a distance to be our model, to instruct us in principles of our own tongue. This is how, Webster sort of in American English is established in a way. But then, this is scholars from England. I'm not so sure you're aware of this person, which I just forgot the name. I'm sleep talk, so. So anyway, this is attitude towards American English at a similar time. The amount of bad grammar in circulation is very great, that of barbarism. The commonest words are so often so transmogrified as to be placed beyond recognition of Englishmen. Corruptions and degradations of the English language the Americans have chosen arbitrarily to change the meaning of certain old and established English words for reasons which they cannot explain, which I doubt much. I feel it's something of a duty to express that natural feeling of Englishmen, unless the present progress of change be arrested. The nation will cut off from the advantages arising if they contemplate such an event with complacency. Let them go on and prosper. They have only to progress in their present course, and their grandchildren bid fair to speak a jargon as noble and peculiar as the most patriotic American linguist can desire. So you see these are two very different attitudes towards a new variety of English. This still happens in terms of, new English. Okay, right. Okay. New English being a global language, there are new different varieties of English is being emerged. So here is the quirks, 1980s, quirks anxiety over this new birth of new Englishes. Quirks anxiety's negative effects on locally acquired deviation on the English language because it's unintelligible. We just can't understand. Language should be a tool for communication. If you can't understand, what's the point? That's this argument. And another argument is, we need to, there is a standard English. We should learn that. But then the cut through, from a British Indian scholar speaking Indian English is mainly his view on this. The strength of the English language is in presenting the Americanness in American English and the Englishness in its British variety. Let us therefore appreciate other varieties of English too. So this leads to the studies on English word Englishes and try to document different features of Englishes, talking about pragmatic features, talking about spellings, talking about pronunciation, talking about grammar, and so on. And under the different scholarly fields, such as English as international language, English as global English, word Englishes, and so on. And here in UK, I did a bit of a study since I'm coming here. So UK features, several distinct varieties of English. As you probably, in this room, you might have a completely different Englishes. And here we have a North American English, Australian, Korean English happening here. So these varieties are very different, as I don't have to explain this. In Britain, about 2% of Britain speaks received pronunciation, RPs, so-called Oxford English or Queen's or King's English and so on. And the Englishes can be seen as geographically differences like Liverpool, Manchester, and so on, but also social varieties as well. English accent is mark of a social status, depending on your socioeconomic background or your ethnic groups, you have different Englishes. Okay. Probably, I don't have to explain this. These are two major varieties. I'm sorry, Australian English is not considered a major yet. So I gave these two varieties of English. The vocabulary differences. And Australian English has a bit of an identity issue, I think. We use American vocabulary, yet we tend to follow British spellings, although that changes a bit. Okay. So now I'm also, not only these two major varieties of English, Oxford English is a great source to documenting different varieties of English. So such as Australian English, Canadian English, Caribbean English, Hong Kong English, Indian English, and Irish Englishes, and so on. And so one example, let me give you one example. In terms of grammar or meaning of a word of news in Indian English, while in British English or Australian English is collective noun, so it's uncountable noun. You wouldn't say a news, but in Indian English, it's a piece of news. So you use a article in front, or you can pluralize it. Okay, that's one example. Now, phonics teaching. Let's talk about phonics teaching. Okay. So I have 2 minutes or 1 minute to talk about. According to British English or Australian English, talking about face, because of E, it's a split digraph. You have to pronounce A face, but it's not always the case. In terms of Indian English, for example, V and W are interchangeable, okay? And that P and F is also interchangeable. To non-Indian English speakers, they sound very similar, okay? And same as S-I-N-G, G is also pronounced as a sing. And then some more examples here. In Singapore and Malaysian English, this T-E-A, T-H-A sound the same, and same as the die and T-H, and then help pronounced the same way. And finally, this is a comparison between Singapore and Australian English. So let's see, in Australian English, the short E and long E are different. In kit, in short E, and fleece and happy is long E. But Singapore English, they're all collectively same short E sound. Again, another good example is face in its split digraph. So in Australian English, we call face, but again, Singapore is not, it's a face. Face, So, not my final slide, really. So now, I'm not here to give you the answers. I don't have answers yet. I'm working on it. I'm still junior scholar. But I have a question here. How do we determine then correct, letter and sound relationship in plurilingual Anglophone classrooms? Then, how do we discern between students' various English productions, pronunciation, or their lack of phonological awareness? If a student pronounces a pit as in thinking F-I-T, what do you say? Does he know P or F? Or then, then should the phonics instruction prioritize receptive skills rather than productive skills? Or what can we do? Finally, how can phonics teaching maintain social cultural sensitivity without neglecting English varieties? Particularly in synthetic phonics, there's one rule. I don't know what in phonics say here in UK. Which pronunciation do you use? 2% of RP, is that what's the standard? I assume so. 98% of students have to learn that. Anyway, that's my final talk. Thank you.
What an absolute impossible task to have to keep you to time when I'm like, this is just so fascinating. I must pay more attention to the clock rather than you. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that insight. Next up, we have Dr. Rebecca Jessen from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, discussing context, relationality and culture at the intersection of research and practice. Yes, correct. That's how, sorry, I got really into what you were saying. Skip that. We will be hearing from Rebecca, but before Rebecca, we have Professor Rachel Hayden from the Western University, Ontario, Canada, talking about socio-material production of literacy curriculum and the myth of curricular control. The myth of curricular control.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much. I'm just enjoying this incredibly. Let's see if I can make it work. No, I can't. Yes, I did. All right. I was so interested in what you were talking about, Hejong, because, of course, I am coming to you from the lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenapehoik, and Chinookan nations in Ontario, Canada. And this issue of dialect, also of language, of dialect and pronunciation, and the attempt to instantiate a singular pronunciation and a singular English in pluralistic classrooms is of grave concern for us. And really what I would like to do here today, and these slides are really text heavy, and my apologies for that. And as I said to the lovely person sitting behind me here, we in Canada apologize for a lot. So So apologies for the text-heavy slides. But really what I want to do here today is I just want to expand this conversation of the science of reading that so many of us have been having, and talk a little bit from my vantage in Ontario, Canada, about what's been happening, and also why an emphasis on an attempt to control what happens within curriculum on the part of governments, on the part of other policymakers, including school districts and school boards, and even an attempt to find the right way to teach something. Why that is a series of endeavors that are destined to fail. Okay, that's really what I'm trying. The point that I'm trying to get across here today, and how instead what we need to be thinking with are the principles of ethics and really supporting the educators in classrooms and the other people, the children who are occupying those classrooms, fortifying them with what they need so that they can have the entanglements that can make them capable. That is what I'm attempting to argue here today. So very briefly, in Ontario, we have started a journey with the Ontario Human Rights Commission issuing a report that is saying that what we have been doing in our province has been contrary to human rights. That the teaching of what may have been thought of as a form of balanced literacy is in fact a violation of human rights. And that the only way that we can promote human rights in our classrooms is to have a phonics first, and in some cases a phonics only approach. And so I have found myself in this really strange situation where, after decades of being a teacher and trying to work ethically with my students, and now as a teacher educator, where I have found myself on the wrong side of human rights. And if I'm getting a little teary, I hope you will excuse me for that. There's another apology. So what you need to know is that Ontario in some ways is a very powerful province. And so what happens in Ontario tends to then move out into our other provinces and territories. And that's exactly what is happening. So the Ontario Human Rights Commission, its report is now being taken up elsewhere. And it says that we need to remove the use of cueing systems for word reading. We need to remove context. We need to remove semantics. We need to remove all of this from our teaching. It is also saying that my teacher education classroom and all other teacher education classrooms need to do similarly when we are teaching teacher candidates. And we have a fairly nice kindergarten curriculum, but it is now having to be rewritten. And it's not that old. Told you it would be text heavy. What I want you to pay attention to here is the following. The second bit of highlight. This comes from the report. Although some approaches to reading are promoted as research-based, this research does not always follow good scientific method. Footnote 645. Then you see note 645. For example, so what is an example of bad research? Relying on observation of students in the classroom. I might get teary again, sorry. What are some of the assumptions that are embedded in statements like the ones that we've just seen? Well, Gillen and Hall told us a while ago that there's a form of reading instruction that is based on the assumptions that children's agency is insignificant, that children can learn nothing for themselves, that children are objects to be manipulated, that reading and writing are autonomous acts involving sets of discrete perceptual skills. And then I added this one as a curriculum scholar, the idea that teaching and learning and children can be predicted and controlled. So this is an old style kind of Tylerian rationale of curriculum. I have done a series of studies of early years literacy in kindergarten classrooms and other early years classrooms, including, you can see in the top left there, intergenerational classrooms where we have seniors learning with young children in really beautiful settings. And there are some things that I have learned, and I'm just going to run through a couple. I'm going to show you how in a kindergarten classroom that I was in, that this classroom, which was in an urban city, which was a neighborhood, which was a first stop for many new immigrants, where half of the student population was living in lower income households. Approximately 30% of the children were identified as English language learners and were identified as high needs because of things like hunger. And in this classroom, there were 32 children at its maximum. Now, I want to remind you that in Ontario, children can be as young as 3.6 years of age in a kindergarten classroom. And those of you who know what a child that's 3.6 years of age is like, can you picture 32 of them in a classroom? And within this classroom, when I talked with the teacher about literacy curriculum, well, she said, really, there was not a lot of literacy curriculum. And one of the biggest mediators of the fact that it was hard to get to the literacy teaching was the fact that there was one toilet for 32 children who were approximately 3.6 years of age. So you can imagine what all of that teacher's time was taken up with. But curriculum's the most important thing. Do you think the people at the ministry ever thought about the toilet? Probably not. We know not. So there was no time to get to reading assessment. So that's the bad news story. In terms of the good news story, and I really only have 1 minute left, this is from an intergenerational classroom that I worked in. And I want to show you the child and the senior who worked together and fell in love with each other over their time together. And on the left here is a little chatterpix that this child in the picture made. And the chatterpix, he did a drawing, which he's showing Neil, and this black slash here is actually an animation in the chatterpix. And so the child did his drawing, he uploaded it into his iPad, he put it into the chatterpix app, he's 4 years old, and then he animated it and he recorded his voice over top. And what did he record himself saying? I love you, Neil. Okay, the punchline. If I can get to it. So, the punchline. Young people's agency is produced intra-relationally. So that means that it's constituted and acted with and through others. It will affect what they do or do not learn. Learning is not wholly dependent on the adult or the teacher. Literacies are intra-relational, they are intra-actional, and therefore contextual. Classrooms matter. The classroom matters. Literacy education is entangled with young people's subject formation, how they see themselves, the sense that they have of who they are in the world, the English that they speak or do not speak, that they aspire to speak. where they can be viewed and can view themselves as citizens of today with whom teachers and other adults need to negotiate. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I mean, who knew this was going to be such an emotional roller coaster? But yeah, thank you very, very much. So much to say, but so little time. We need a conference. We need a week-long conference to just really sit with this stuff. Okay, so next up, really now, Dr. Rebecca Jensen from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, discussing context, relationality and culture at the intersection of research and practice.
Tēnā rā koutou katoa, ko Rebecca tōku ingoa, no o Aotearoa ahau. I come to you from Aotearoa, New Zealand, the land of the Māori. I want to talk to you today about a classroom study that we have done about culture and relationality intersecting in classrooms. So this is our map of the world. We're at the top. You probably are familiar with cries of literacy crisis discourses, and we are in one too, and this is our PISA results, which are used as our crisis discourse. But what have been asking is, where is this context of disparity? So our crisis discourse is also around disparity in our system. We have some of the biggest disproportionate rates of achievement between high SES and lower SES students. And we know some of the things that sit underneath those disparities, things like housing, attendance at school, welfare, personal well-being. These are things that sit underneath our disparities. And so we've been working for a long time in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to figure out how we shift our distribution such that we haven't got this wide disparity. So we've been doing a lot of work across the country on interventions that are aimed at the students who are achieving at the bottom end of this distribution. And what I'm going to say to you is that we have possibly been thinking about these students as being homogenous because they look in two-dimensional shape like they are similar. But what if we thought of that bell curve as three-dimensional? And this is a hill. This is a hill close by my house, a Maunga, a mountain. And you can see I put 3 stars in the corners to sort of represent that children who are struggling to learn to read are not the same as each other. They can be a very, very long way from each other in terms of crossing over that hill. That was my three-dimensional bell curve. So I'm going to talk to you about a study and just the underlying proposition of the study is that children's expertises vary, and they can vary as much as the children on the previous slide, who are a long way away from each other. Their experiences vary, their language backgrounds vary, the text that they have in their homes varies, their literacy practices with those texts varies, and the modalities that they use vary. And that variation is contextual. So in our context, we have an oral narrative study where family reminiscing is a key benefit for literacy learning, key predictor. So these literacy practices, I'm going to argue, are not universal. So that variation in our context is contextual, and it's contextualised with all those things. The other thing that's important in our context to know is that a context can be seen as a set of relations between and among the adults, the children, the text, the practices, and the experiences. So contexts are changing. That context seen in that view are processes, not things. And so there's variation always in changing sets of interactions between all of these different variables. So this particular study that we drew on, we wanted to think about what would a contextualised view of teacher expertise be. And this required us from shifting from the what works discourse, like what's going to work for these students, to a why would it work, and thinking about what is going on under the surface. Because what we are seeing in a lot of the things that we've been arguing works for particular groups is that practices are recommended, and I'm going to make those like the daisies above the surface. That's what people can see, the what. But what's going on underneath the surface, the why it works, that's what you need to understand in order to contextualise. So as a teacher, in an average everyday busyness, business as usual classroom, my job is to understand what's going on beneath the surface. So that means a very specialised view of teacher noticing, because it takes teacher noticing from looking at what you can see to looking at what you can't see, which is a little bit of a contradiction in terms. Because when children are making connections, they're doing so based on their varied experience, their varied language backgrounds, their varied text, their practices and their modalities. And those connections are where that synthesis is happening, and that's where they're learning. So in order for us to see and to notice what's going on for them, we have to be able to see the unseen. Which means understanding or theorising change, and thinking about when we're seeing change, what general principle or what has happened that has underpinned this change. And then we have to make decisions based on an accurate interpretation of what we've seen. So we are making decisions based on a theory of what we think is going on for a particular child and the connections they're making. So that means not only knowing what they know, it also means knowing what connections are possible for them to be making. And then having made that decision, we have to figure out how would we know if we were right? What would test that decision? What would be evidence of that I have made a right decision as a teacher, and that would be learning, and what would evidence of learning look like? And it might be observation. And so then we were thinking about, and how do teachers make adaptations based on those underlying explanatory theories of what's going on for children? And how do we plan for change? And that means making very planned, but also adaptable decision making. So again, another contradiction, this idea of making adaptations based on the evidence of your observation of what's going on in front of your eyes, between what you know about this child, what you know about theory and the general principles, and how those two things are interacting with all the texts and experiences and people of this child is bringing with them. So that was the underpinning principle of how we were thinking about moving away from interventions and what works for children to teacher expertise, not what works, but why is that thing working, and what might work even better. Kia ora koutou, that's me.
Flowers and pillars and later helixes, my goodness, it's all happening. Next up, what do we have? Thank you very much. Next up, we have, you know how I said we need a conference? There just happens to be one this weekend. I don't know if you've heard. We have David Reedy from the UK Literacy Association talking phonics and learning to read, the UK Literacy Association's view.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here as well. I got asked if I would do this to represent the UKLA, UK Literacy Association, and what we are saying about the teaching of reading in particular, which I'm going to focus on. And so what I thought I'd do to start with is I'd do an advert for the UKLA, just in case nobody knows about it. Here we are. It's a professional association, a subject association. We are a charity. We are a member association. We've got lots of different kinds of members, including librarians, teachers, academics, and so on. And what we do is we work together because what our... If I can go backwards. No, that's going to take me forward. Sorry. What we're interested in, we've got a sole objective, and that's the to advance education in literacy. So it's about both evidence and practice. It's about how those two interrelate. And what we're interested in is not only looking for research and evidence, but looking at how that might play out in classrooms and what the interaction between research and practice actually is. So when I talk about what we do, there's a big conference coming up at the weekend in Brighton, sold out, 300 people coming together to talk about research evidence in literacy and implications from classrooms. And as part and parcel of that, we will be talking about the teaching of reading and the place of phonics within the teaching of reading. We publish journals, and it's really important that we do so to get the word out about what's going on. Literacy is the one which is kind of more classroom practice focused, and journal research and reading more kind of, how should I put this, numbers focused, number focused in terms of data. And the reason I'm saying this is because actually what we need to, if we're thinking about what we do to make a difference to children's lives, we have to think about what are we doing collectively. It's not just about what we do individually. We have to do things collectively in order to make a difference. We have to come together in organisations and in groups of organisations to make a difference. And we have to be informed about that and the way that we argue about what needs to happen in order for those differences to children's lives to be made. So if I move on to reading, one of the things that I think we just need to be clear about is what do we mean by reading? There are two simple, if I can get to them, just a couple of simple definitions that one comes from the US in 2000, the complex system of deriving meaning from print. And then from John Richmond, something at UKLA published in 2015, reading is learning to read is learning to infer and to construct meaning from writing. I'd say I would define writing as multimodal. It's not just print text, it's texts that are images, moving image, still images, multimodal text as well. But essentially it's about meaning making. How do we make meaning together to make sense of the text that we meet in our lives? One of the models that a member of UKLA has produced, Wayne Tennant, if we can get to it, is this one, which I find quite useful in thinking about what needs to happen to as we make sense, we derive meaning. We make meaning from the text that we meet. And you can see it actually is a complex process. And so our view from a UKLA is it is a complex process of making meaning. And we've got these four big components. We've got linguistic processes, we've got cognitive processes, which includes decoding. And phonics is one aspect of the decoding process. We've got metacognitive processes, and we've got knowledge bases. I'm not going to go through all of those now. I haven't got enough time. But what these, if you like, psychological processes are contextualised by is the social. Reading is a profoundly social process. We make sense in the context of our families. We make sense in the context of our communities. We make sense in the context of our societies, in the context of the language and the languages we use, and within the classrooms that we find ourselves. And so we mustn't forget that. And we've known that about the social contexts, the way that we make sense within those social contexts within which we live, for a very long time. Research has been telling us for a very long time about that, and we've heard aspects of that today as well. One of the seminal texts for me, back in the day, and I still think it's relevant, is Shirley Bryce Heath's work, Ways with Words. If you haven't come across that, it's now the 40th anniversary of its publication this year. It's 40 years old, 1983 it was published. I read this on my summer holiday in 1989, must have been 1989, and it changed my view of the world, fundamentally. And I think I joined UKLA almost immediately afterwards. And it talks about how different communities make sense differently and how that impacts in the classroom. So when we think about learning to read, we must not ignore the social. We must not ignore what children bring to the classroom, with them to the classroom. And so we have to think about phonics within that context. And so if we think of, and UKLA's position is just around this, about what therefore, if we've got this kind of complex way of making sense, both psychologically, embedded in social contexts, then what do we need to think about straightforwardly in terms of what the implications are for the classroom? And so this is what UKLA have said about this. If I can find, if it will come through. Oh, there we go. So, successful reading, teaching, balance. It uses a balance of phonics and meaning-focused approaches. What's the point in reading? It's to make meaning, it's to make sense. So if we ignore that and we just do, as some of the governments around the world are saying, we just do phonics, then actually we're ignoring the fundamental basis of what it is to read. We need to have high levels of engagement, we need to develop children's understanding, we need to play around with the language and enjoy it, we need to put the text to use, and we have to respect the experiences of language and literacy that children bring to school. And as we've stated, phonics alone doesn't develop successful readers. The evidence shows that. We need to develop a range of strategies to make sense of what they read and recognise themselves and their experiences in what they read. And just to finish, it's not just UKLA saying this. In the room, there are many, many people who are represented in the Common English Forum. I think probably you could put your hands up. So CLPE is represented. There is the English and Media Centre. There's UKLA. There's NATE, National Association of Teaching of English. There's the English Association. Have I missed anybody out? So again, not only individual organisations where people come together collectively, but lots of organisations with similar views on things coming together collectively to make a difference and to try and influence thinking, particularly in the context we find ourselves in the UK currently with an election in 2 days' time. Yeah? So we need to be sure that we are trying to help politicians understand that the evidence and the arguments from a whole range of different organisations are saying the same kinds of things here. That phonics is just one of many aspects of reading. That we must affirm the identities and languages that pupils use in the books selected to ensure that a narrow and elitist or monocultural view of the world is not dominating. And the work of CLPE here is really important in doing that work. So, I'm going to finish there and just come back to the point. Collectively, we can make a difference.
you. Thank you all for your thought-provoking, moving and inspiring presentations. I feel like Avengers Assemble kind of energy right now after that. Thank you for highlighting the need for this work, the need for your efforts, and the need for this book, and the need for a collective, collaborative enterprise. Thank you. So just about the book then. The last speakers, last but not least, that I'd like to welcome to the stage are Professor Dominic Wyse and our very own Charlotte Hacking. Come on up.
Am I going first?
Yeah, you are.
Actually, do you want to come that side now? Well, first of all, a massive thank you to you people here, and huge thanks to the speakers. I'm hoping that Young is still online, and thank you, Young. It's difficult. She wanted to be here, but for various reasons couldn't. It's difficult to kind of punch through when you're online compared to when you're in the room, but it's much appreciated. And what struck me, Charlotte, was the things that people are saying are kind of in different ways we've tried to address in the book, haven't we? It's kind of come together almost as if it was really well planned. It was, honestly, it was. Not by me, thankfully. Now, I'll try and wrestle with the clicker. And oh, that went quite quickly. Excellent. So, I don't know if you've heard, but we've written this book. So we didn't want to just tell you about the book because, of course, some of you have actually read it, which is really heartening. Thank you so much. But we wanted to start thinking about what next, and David's nicely laid the ground for us, really. He's mentioned politics. Those of you who know me won't be surprised, I will mention politics. But also we want to start to seriously think about, what kind of things would we like to see happening in policy, practice, and to some degree, researchers. But what does obsession look like? It looks like 15% of your children, if you have children, if you teach children, 15% of their whole curriculum in year 1 and year 2 is synthetic phonics. Imagine that, 15%. Now, I'm sure any right-minded parent, teacher, frankly, anyone in society would think, surely that can't be the best use of every single child's time, irrespective of their needs. And so that, to me, is a concern. I wish I'd not put these bullet points on a kind of rotating thing, because now it takes ages. Right, so the phonics screening check is part of a series of political levers that are used to enforce a particular ideology. The phonics screening check is the strongest lever of all of these, and it's done many things, including distort the curriculum for our 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds as well. There we are, right. And there are many things, but I wanted to single out one thing. It has come up already today, this idea that that reading and writing are informed primarily by making meaning, understanding meaning, engaging with meaning. So this is a quote from one of the ways that commercial suppliers of synthetic phonics schemes can get their product onto the market and into schools. They have to meet this note. And you can see that the note says that the focus of the teaching approach should be on phonemes, not on consonant clusters, etc. But this idea that children are not allowed to guess words by using clues such as the pictures or the context of the sentence they're actually reading. I really have always struggled with that massively. When I first read it, I was genuinely shocked. And I thought I didn't get shocked by many of these things. Anyway, we needed to document in the first chapter various political aspects that are happening, not just in England. We've unpicked the Ontario Human Rights Report, and there's this extraordinary thing in the USA going on. So we do begin with that. Well, even if you took the narrow measure of the phonics screening check, 20% of 6-year-olds did not meet the standard in 2023, 21%. And that's in spite of a relentless focus on synthetic phonics in every state primary school in the land. The other aspects, which perhaps are even more worrying, are around things like the wider test or assessments of reading and writing. And I think one of our themes is really how important writing is, and we were so pleased to hear others speaking today talking about the importance of writing, and indeed to hear Young kick off by saying, absolutely the evidence is quite clear, we need to think about reading and writing together, and that's certainly, we have thought a lot about that. Okay, a lot of talk around the world about the science of reading, okay? Crudely speaking, there are people who just say, why are you even arguing? Why are you worrying about this? It's all settled. Science has told us what to do, okay? But when you actually look at the science, it doesn't say anything of the sort. It certainly doesn't say, thou shalt only use synthetic phonics to help your children learn to read. So just 3 examples. So one of the many bits of work we did to write the book was to look at, for example, these systematic reviews. Now, Young mentioned one that she'd worked on and published, and you saw the sheer numbers of studies. Well, each one of these 24 systematic reviews has done a similar job, crunched away at lots and lots of studies. So Carol Torgerson and colleagues in 2018 say many studies have added phonics to whole language. You talk to some people, they'd say whole language is like the devil at work. The idea you should even think about whole language is outrageous. So actually what the evidence shows is that they say that whole language was added to phonics instruction, and which we would say is really balanced instruction, so did they. Or if you take a very different kind of population of children, so children struggling readers who are identified in usually through assessments and tests. Russell Gerson and colleagues said, well, if you have multiple components, you're more likely to help those children who struggle. And I was struck by what our speakers said today about the differing needs of different children and the need to get to the why and the roots underneath. I was very taken by that. And then one systematic review that I worked at with my colleague Alice, who's here today, this one is only longitudinal studies. So these are studies in some cases where the testing of the children who had the intervention continued for 4 years after the intervention. And Sebastian Suggett found that phonics interventions that included a comprehension component were more effective than those that did not. So, guessing is bad. And you might think I'm being a bit sort of crude about this. No, it really is like that. In fact, in the USA, laws are being enacted in states to force teacher trainers not to encourage guessing, okay? It really is happening in these ways. So let's look at the true science of reading again. So here's a seminal experimental randomized controlled trial, and this is what the intervention that was successful did. So if children came across a word they did not know, then they were to use the story as it emerged to think about that word, not just the phonemes and the letters. And that was shown to be more effective in 1990. And I'm grateful to the journalist Colin Barras, who did a piece about my work with Alice in The New Scientist. He was the one who reminded me of this study. But it's quite clear, so it's wrong to say that guessing doesn't work. It really does work. And so we argue on the basis of evidence that the balanced approach is more effective than discrete phonics. Now, so far I've talked mainly about what we might call typically developing readers. There is some evidence that children who struggle, they certainly have to learn to crack the code, as all children do. But let's look at a seminal study done with children who struggle with reading, and let's see what it said. So 128 children with reading difficulties were put into 4 groups, and they received different kinds of interventions. So this was Peter Hatcher, Charles Hume, Maggie Snowling, very eminent researchers in the field. So if these things were taught in an isolated way, if they were taught separately, it was less effective for these children than if you teach them together. Now, for some of you, you'll kind of cotton onto this and go, yes, absolutely, almost I'm not surprised. For other people here, they might think, well, does all this really matter? Well, yes, it really does matter, because if we really care about genuinely helping children succeed, which we all want to do, then there's very, very clear evidence of the way we can do that, which politicians, certainly in England for the last 10 years, in my view, have just not been following, and that's the argument that we make in the book. One of the arguments. I'm almost tempted to say, talk among yourselves while this next bullet point loads up. But that could get out of control. Oh yes, there's the citation, right. Right, now I will try and be brief, and Charlotte, let you say the more important things, really. So these are the very first words in England's national curriculum about how we should teach reading, writing, language literacy. I've quoted directly, and what I'm questioning here is, I just don't think this is ambitious enough, exciting enough. I just don't think this is sufficient for what we really want going forward. So I've had a go at suggesting some different wording in what I hope will be a revised national curriculum. And I've highlighted in red the things that I think are most important in what we say in the book. The whole thing should be driven, in our view, by composition, comprehension, and communication of meaning. And we're not alone, as I've heard from the speakers. And in terms of the aims, you'll notice the word language is very much, we deliberately are saying, this is about language and languages. Yes, we want children to learn to use the English language in ways that are most appropriate for them. But England has had this very particular elitist view about the English language, and it's great to see you talking about the Queen's English, received pronunciation, and it's a distortion, and it doesn't reflect what language is really like. It could be you next, Charlotte. But who knows what slide's going to come up here. Oh, that is for you.
Thank you. So we've worked in a very synchronous way in creating this book, looking at the research and looking at the practice. And what we need to look at now is, what is it that we're looking for in order to bring those words of your new national curriculum into the classroom? What do we actually want to see? And one of the seminal pieces of the book is our new model for the teaching of reading and writing. It's based, as everybody has said, on starting from children and the languages they speak. And when we say languages, that is not just different languages, it's different dialects, it's different accents. It's their environment as well. Starting from the child, what are they bringing with them? What is their environment like? What text knowledge they already have? And looking, if this does work, at that crucial relationship. Yeah, that's the all moment. And looking at that crucial interrelationship between reading and writing, we need a clear understanding of what being literate entails. We know that language underpins our reading and writing, as does that supportive environment. But reading fosters our writing. Margaret Meek was one of my seminal texts. You talked about that, how texts teach what readers learn. We learn the lessons of writing from the text that we read. And writing also supports the development of reading. As a reception teacher, as a teacher everywhere, we know that children come to reading through the writing they create themselves a lot of the time. And it's balancing. It's that real balancing act. We're not phonics denialists. I have taught many children phonics. It is really successful in giving them that leg up into independence in reading and writing. But it is about the balance of that knowledge and skills with that fostering of engagement and motivation. This is unpicked a lot more in the book, but also in the fantastic literacy publication that David mentioned earlier. There is a paper on the double helix of reading and writing in there as well that goes into it in more detail than we've got time today. But what we want to think about here is, we will get there in a minute, what this actually looks like. So when we say starting with the child and their environment, we know through lots of research, particularly markedly the research of Siraj, that it's the background knowledge, the background understanding that children bring with them that is that foundation of literacy. We know that those children who succeed against the odds are the children that are talked to, that are played with, that are taken to the library, that have the bedtime story cycle, as Don Holdaway called it, that have those parents that read with them, that tell stories with them. I loved what you were saying about that recollection of family experiences. It's all of those things that set that foundation for the successful teaching of literacy. And it's also children being able to see themselves in the literate space. And I do have to credit the other book that CLPE have launched this year, this fantastic book by my esteemed colleague over there, Faris Sarouk, looking at bringing all of the research from the Reflecting Realities reports that Faris conducted over the last 7 years into practice in the classroom, and looking at the fact that actually, as if we're sharing books on a daily basis, children need to meet texts that have characters look like them, that sound like them, and that share those experiences. They need to see that literature is a place and space for them and others in the world around them. So we need to be making sure that we're providing a really wide range of texts that feature those diverse and representative characters. We want to put the best, I'm going to really regret this slide because it's got animations as well. We want to put the best children's books at the heart of the curriculum, and through 20 years of doing the power of reading here at CLPE, we know what makes a high quality text that drives that motivation for reading. But that doesn't mean taking the phonics away. We can use all of these texts, and then we can look at how do we bring that phonics language and learning into that literacy experience as well. This is going to be a really fun slide. We can bring, at the beginning of that literacy experience, those initial phonemes, that basic code, into a brilliant book by poet John Hegley, Stanley's Stick. The alliteration in there invites us into the world of listening to sounds. We can look at how that code develops into knowing that actually sometimes it's more than one letter that represents the sound that we speak. And then when we get a little bit more handling of it, actually sometimes different letters can represent the same sound, and sometimes when we see a letter, it represents more than one sound. All of that brilliant stuff that you were talking about. And then there can be different accents and dialects as well. We want to also base this on what makes a really good curriculum for our youngest children. I'm particularly concerned about the erosion of play for our youngest children, particularly post-COVID. We want a really enriching experience where we can look at a book like Stanley's Stick, and then children can actually engage actively with the learning and concepts. This little nursery child weaving sticks, what's she doing? Well, that's the first bit of the writing bit of the Helix model. She's learning how to use objects that is going to develop all of those fine motor skills to make marks. All of these children are engaging in stick activity, that imagination that involves the beginnings of composition. Can I have an idea? Can I take it forward for myself? These brilliant reception children here who are burning sticks that they later used the charcoal for to do really close observational drawings of the sticks they found, that then gave them language to actually describe those sticks in action, to make a beautiful list poem here. And going out into the forest school to develop their learning even further. If learning cannot be fun, engaging and enjoyable in primary schools, when is it ever going to do that? And that's what we really need to talk about here. We also need teachers that are really knowledgeable, not just about reading, but how to choose and use texts that are going to support children at every stage of their journey. So with texts that we looked at just like then, Stanley's Stick, we want to be using that as part of quality first teaching. We're lifting the children to the level of a book that they might not experience in their own everyday experiences. We're enjoying it together. We can then, in smaller guided reading groups and smaller read aloud books, draw on texts like Julia Donaldson's lovely rhyming repetitive Stickman that consolidates certain language patterns, knowledge about text, all of those book handling skills. With children who absolutely need it, we can then draw on scheme texts where they're appropriate to focus on really specific reading skills and strategies. And when you're looking at scheme books and decodable texts, we need to look at them with the same eyes as we look at any text in the classroom. There are some that are better than others. There are some that have really good representation. There are some that have been written by real children's authors. Those are the kinds of texts that are going to then make those connections with other areas of the literacy curriculum. We also need this. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back now. We also need this. We need teachers who have got... Can I go backwards? No? Yes, I can. No? Oh, let's just forget. Oh, here we go. It's all going now. We also need teacher license. The other thing that I am really... Thank you. That cheer in the room is really heartening. Teachers need autonomy. They need to be able to know their children, to know reading, and to make the best decisions at every stage of a child's reading journey to apply their professional judgment, to know what to do with who and when. And that needs a really focused programme of CPD. Ofsted's recent English report stated that teachers have really good knowledge of phonics. Well, surprise, surprise, because that's where all the CPD's gone into. But we need to work on fluency and comprehension. We need a rounded experience of what reading is, how children progress on that journey, and how we as educators can draw on their needs, their interests and experiences, and the best kinds of books and language to get them where they need to be. We also need to have that opportunity for children to have that choice, voice and agency. We looked at some Stanley Stick work with the beginnings of reception. As children move along that phonics journey, as they pick up the rich language from real text and the skills to blend, to segment, to decode and to encode, you will get writing at the end of reception that is fed by rich text and rich experiences to show how that's used and applied in practice. This is not the cat sat on the pin. Cats don't sit on pins. That's animal cruelty. This is writing that is really fostered by rich language and experiences. You've got Molly here. Frog eggs are surrounded by jelly and they eat seaweed. You can see she's using and applying her knowledge of the digraph, double E, but she's also got richer word knowledge than that because she knows the word jelly doesn't have that EE, it has EY. She's understanding already that there are different patterns in different words. Matilda, the frog suddenly grows strong back legs so they can jump. That's a sentence written by a child that's had that really rich experience of spoken language from the models around her, from the text models that she's had in the books, and from a really big drive to share what she knows with an audience. There is choice, there is voice, there is agency in that writing. These two girls want to share what they've learned with an audience of their own. And that's a real understanding of what being literate entails. Teachers also, and lovely Emily is in the room here who was on this photo here, teachers also need, through organisations, as David said, coming together to access research and resources that are going to build that subject knowledge in a really supportive community for teachers to learn and develop. That's one of our core aims here at CLPE. It's why we're a member of the UKLA and the Common English Forum. It's why we share our building with the English and Media Centre. We are all organisations that are driven to work together to do that for teachers so that teachers can have a really rounded view of what literacy is. And that's us in the book. We want that education that's really rooted in research evidence and excellent practice. So we'd like to round up today by handing back over to Farah because there's some golden ticket winners, but by thanking you all for coming tonight, for engaging in the debate and to help us to share the importance of that balanced approach, drawing on what everybody has said here today. Thank you.